Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Plan to Ship, Illumina's connected supply chain with SAP IBP, Transport Management Systems, and Business Network. Thank you for joining us today. This is not a slide heavy webinar, it's a moderated conversation designed to be practical. What decisions were made, what was harder than expected, and what delivered value, and what you should avoid as you modernize planning and logistics. So we are joined by leaders from Illumina, SAP, and Bristlecone, bringing together the customer's perspective, the product roadmap perspective, and the implementation lens. Quick housekeeping: please use the Q&A chat window to post any questions at any point of time. We'll reserve time to cover as many as possible. You'll get the recording of this session as well. For any inquiries, please feel free to send an email to us at info@bristlecone.com. With that, let's get started. Let's kick things off with a little context here and a bit of a fun. Illumina is in the business of decoding life. When I say that, literally. Their technologies power the breakthroughs in genomics that are shaping the future of healthcare, life sciences, and research across the globe. And behind that world-changing science sits an equally complex reality: the global R&D, precision manufacturing, strict regulatory regulations, and supply chains that leave zero room for error. In short, this is not a place where spreadsheets and hope get the job done. So that brings us very naturally to our first speaker. We are thrilled to have Vinod Nagarahalli, Director of IT, Global Supply Chain and Operations, and Enterprise Solution Architect at Illumina. Joining us from San Diego, Vinod is a technology and business transformation leader with over 2 decades of experience, meaning he has seen digital transformation back when it was called doing IT properly. At Illumina, he leads global strategy, architecture, delivery of mission-critical digital platforms, supporting all that R&D, manufacturing, etc. Welcome to Vinod.
Thanks, Guru.
Thanks. Now, moving from the customer lens to the product crystal ball, right? From SAP, we're joined by Klaus Jensen, who brings deep expertise across SAP IBP, TMS, and Business Network. Klaus focuses on value realization, translating those roadmaps and features into what tangible business value that customer can get. He connects the what and the why of SAP solution. He makes sure that customers don't just adopt the platforms, but actually they benefit from them. Welcome, Klaus.
Pleasure to be here, Guru.
Thank you. And finally, from Bristlecone, we have Nikhil. Nikhil, he leads our SAP IBP and planning practice. He lives at the intersection of planning and execution, driving integration with the SAP TM Business Network to ensure that the forecasts just don't stop at the PowerPoint, but flow all the way into logistics outcomes and supply chain performance. If planning is the brain, then Nikhil makes sure that those legs actually move. So welcome, Nikhil.
Thanks, Guru.
So with Vinod bringing in the customer reality, Klaus shaping the product vision, and Nikhil driving the execution, we've got all the right voices at the table, and this should be a lively and insightful conversation. With that, let's move on to the first segment, why connected planning to ship, right? So, you have described a world where great plans don't always translate into great outcomes, right? So, Vinod, this is the first one. When you reflect on the journey at Illumina, what made it unmistakably clear that planning and logistics couldn't operate as two separate conversations anymore? What was the trigger that made it clear that Illumina needed to connect those planning decisions more tightly to, logistics execution and visibility?
Thanks, Guru, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the folks in the call here. So at Illumina, the trigger was not a single event. It was actually a pattern. We would see, planning make good decisions, allocate supply, commit to customer demands. But then logistics would operate, in its own silo. Temperature control shipments, multimodal moves across regions, career coordinations, all of this were disconnected from the planning signal, right? So you would have a great plan that fell apart at the last mile because the logistics did not have the visibility into the planning priorities, and planning could not see the execution exceptions in real time. So we had pockets of excellence, right? So strong demand planning, decent supply planning, but the handoff between what we decided and what actually shipped was where we saw the value was leaking. um, that gap between the planning intent and the logistics reality was actually the trigger for us. The leadership recognized that in a regulated life sciences environment like ours, where you're shipping temperature sensitive consumables globally, you cannot afford that disconnect. It was not just about a cost issue. It's a customer trust and a compliance issue. So that was the primary trigger for us. And to add to that was the S4 journey that we were thinking of back in 2009, 19 and 20. So that also was one of the primary triggers for us to look at this solution holistically as to what we could do prior to getting into the S4 roadmap. So I would summarize that into these two triggers for us to be for us to plan the way we did.
Thanks, sir. So what we heard is that the plan itself wasn't a problem. The disconnect was that what happened after the plan that met reality. So Klaus, then wearing SAP hat, when customers tell you that our planning works just fine, what do you see beneath the surface that signals it may no longer be enough, especially in today's world of constant disruption? What tells you it's time to rethink response planning and scenario decisioning?
I think the biggest signal is the proportion of work that is spent on realizing something has happened, and what do I now do about it? I need to find a solution. Not necessarily the best solution, just a solution, then execute on this solution, then on to the next urgent problem at hand. It's not that planning isn't working. It's, in my view, just not working to its full potential. Where planning should rather be about setting goals, simulate ways of getting there, and then decide which path to execute. However, most processes and operating models were defined in less volatile business environments than we live today, which makes them ill suited to the increase in size and frequency of disruptions. And then technology has come a long way in just the last 5 years, which really allows companies to shift those scarce resources, your planners, your human intelligence, to shift them away from reacting to events and coming up with a solution, or the best one, to really perform root cause analysis, root cause resolutions, start establishing early event identification, be it risks, be it opportunities. Is a shipment running late? Do we have insufficient product capacity? Is there change in the demand signals out there? And then simulate various paths and look at the impact from a multispectral lens as to what does it mean from a market fulfillment, these various scenarios. How does that get constrained by my operational capacities? What's the financial impact? And based on that, then really make the best decision, move forward on that. That's where I see the disconnect between what a lot of planning is today, firefighting, to use an often brandy term, versus proactively setting up for success. And I think Winston Churchill said it very well: never let a good crisis go to waste. However, history shows that only companies that are agile, nimble, and prepared are able to thrive in volatile times and outperform their peers. And that's where I see plan has the potential to really step up and become that platform of preparedness.
Got it. So, if volatility is the new normal, the question becomes, how to transform that without creating any chaos. So, Nikhil, for organizations that want speed and resilience, but they don't want to lose governance, how do you frame the transformation journey? What absolutely needs to come first? And just as importantly, what should organizations resist trying to do too early? So, is there
Sure.
any sequence or method to madness?
Yeah, sure, there is. So, for any organization which is embarking on a supply chain transformation journey, the key is to really have a clear vision in terms of its goals and objectives, right? And then this should be broken down into expected benefits and outcomes. And these can be on the business side or even on the IT side. So, when we talk about business benefits, right, these would kind of typically include KPI improvement, say forecast accuracy when it comes to planning, on time in full, working capital reduction, right? So these are some of the KPIs that you would want to improve on the business side. Similarly, on the IT side, you would want to kind of optimize your total cost of ownership, and along with that, provide a framework that is essentially scalable and can support your future business growth, right? So once that is said, then you need to prioritize the requirements and translate that into a roadmap, right? So what is it that you can achieve in the next, say, 6 to 12 months? What needs to be done in the next 1 to 2 years, and then slightly longer, say 3 to 5 years, right? And this kind of forms the backbone of your phase journey. So Illumina, for example, right, there was a very, very clear roadmap that Vinod and his team had laid out for the next 5 years, right? So it started with supply chain planning transformation, followed that up with logistics and transportation management, and more recently they've embarked on the S4 journey, right? The ERP transformation and migration. So I think, Guru, to answer your question, it's important to draw that comprehensive roadmap, and that helps organizations visualize what the end state is going to be, right? So you need to have a view of where you need to be 3, 4, 5 years down the line, right? And at the same time, it's important to kind of provide these regular quantifiable benefits. You don't want these benefits to come in years later. You want some wins along the way as you embark on that journey, right? So this all again depends on the company's objectives and priorities. And once you have that in place, then you need to kind of build a structure that can support it, right? So that structure comprises of pillars such as process, data, right? More importantly, organization change management. So all these three pillars kind of need to come together to support the technology implementation. So, you talk about Illumina, there were dedicated tracks for process, for data, for OCM, and only once that was in place did the engagement commence, right? And I think that is one of the main reasons why Illumina was so successful, right? On the other part of the question, which is what you shouldn't try to do, is probably take up initiatives in silos in isolation without having that end goal in mind, right? So that's one definitely something that you should not do. Or you should also not try to do too many things very quickly without having your backbone or your structure in place, because there is then you'll probably not get the optimum value out of your transformation. So I think these are some do's and don'ts specifically for a phased implementation.
Great, thanks. So now we know why connected planning matters. So let's get into one level deeper in terms of what changed in planning and how that created the downstream impact. Coming back to Vinod, when you started transforming planning at Illumina, how did you decide what to tackle first and what to deliberately leave that alone? Was it demand or S&OP or supply response? And what made that sequencing work without actually disrupting what was already stable?
Sure. So at Illumina, we were very deliberate about our sequencing, right? So phase one was all about SNOP and demand planning in IBP. Why? Because our demand planning process needed the most improvement. we were on a third party planning tool, and there were plenty of challenges around the forecast accuracy and alignment across the regions. Meanwhile, our APO SNP solution for supply planning was relatively stable. So the priority for us was fix the demand visibility first, get the consensus based planning and a workable SNOP execution plan, and leave the supply planning running in APO until we were ready. So that was kind of the first decision that we made. And then we looked at phase two, and phase two was all about inventory optimization in IBP. And the reason was we did not have a dedicated tool for that, and it was a very clear gap that we need to we had to address. And phase three was more of response and supply to replace APO SNP, which then was bringing end-to-end planning into a single platform. The key principle was improve what's broken first. Don't disrupt what was stable, and always maintain in interim integration processes, so there's no break in the planning chain while we were transitioning. That sequence gave us early wins on the demand side while we were protecting the supply continuity. So as Nikhil said, it was a 5-year journey, and this was the first thing that we decided in terms of how we wanted to sequence out without bringing the disruption to business.
Got it. So one thing that's clearly coming through is that technology wasn't the hardest part. So now moving to Nikhil, uh, in real world IBP programs, data plus process harmonization are often where the things either stabilize fast or unravel fast. So what were the top design choices around that data readiness and process standardization that helped get that planning on solid ground at Illumina for you?
Sure. So I think many would agree that the most commonly neglected aspect in a transformation project is data, right? So we've seen many instances where, despite having a so-called successful implementation, engagements have failed due to the data integrity and accuracy issues, right? So, and specifically so for planning engagements, as the cliche goes, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So a lot of focus should be on data. So in Illumina, what we did was, even before we started the IVP engagement per se, we had assessed the data readiness and then kind of accordingly factored in efforts during the engagement to improve data quality, right? So when we started the project, we had a dedicated data team right from day one. And the intent there was to kind of validate and clean up data on a periodic basis. Again, not a one-time cleanup. It had to be done on a periodic basis to ensure that every phase of the engagement, be it testing, SIT, UAT, we had good quality data so that we had the confidence to go live with the right set of data, right? So we had put in validation rules, right? Few that I can think of is, say, if a material is in-house produced, then it should have a production version, BOM, and routing, right? Similarly, if it's a subcontracted material, then it should have the right special procurement key. So we had a bunch of validation rules that we had kind of come up with, and we sort of looked at data from that lens. And what we were able to do with this is get the data right, even during the testing phases, as I mentioned, right? So what the benefit of doing that is that you ensure that the focus of testing is on then enabling functionalities for the business and making sure it addresses the business requirements, than get kind of distracted with data related issues, right? So that was one thing that we did on data. Similarly, on the process side, I think Bristlecone always recommends a process-led technology enablement approach, right? So in Illumina, we had a distinct process consulting engagement where we started with the process design. We brought in our assets and accelerators from Bristlecone. Essentially, that had the industry best practices. It had the process flows right from, say, L2 to L5, right? We benchmarked Illumina's processes against the industry best practices, and eventually created a design template, a global design template, that would then be kind of scalable across the regions, right? So one thing that we also kind of had a learning very early on in the engagement was to get the regional inputs in. So we made sure that there was representation from the regions in the design workshops, and the global template that was then built was sort of robust, right? And it took care of most of the requirements across the regions. And what that enabled was the subsequent rollouts that came through. They needed minimal, say, localization or tweaking from the global template, right? So these were sort of some of the things that we did on the data as well as on the process side, and I think that helped greatly in the overall tool or the IVP implementation.
Thanks, Nikhil. So what we have heard is how planning matured, but the real test is when actual volatility hits. So, Klaus, we are in one such world today. So, can you bring response and supply to life for us in practical terms when supply is constrained and the lead times are unpredictable? What does this capability actually enable the planners to do that they simply couldn't do before?
Yeah, it's the name kind of gives it away. It's really focusing on how do I respond when demand or supply changes with a very clear view on what to do on the supply side, operational side of the organization. So, in practical terms, it's about enabling teams, and I think that's a key metric here, or key word here is it's a team effort. So I'm not sitting, Klaus, I have my own little piece of the pie to take care of. I understand the impact across the network, the sub network, the value chain, but it allows me to run scenarios across those the areas impacted by any change, compare options, and understand the impact of these various options. As mentioned before, this multifaceted lens of what does it mean for order fulfillment, capacity utilization, and financial impact, thereby helping the organizations to stay agile instead of reacting too late. This is done by the system, SAP, IBP, Response Supply, creating realistic and constraint aware supply plans. The connection or the integration with the operations, be it manufacturing, be it warehousing, be it logistics, ensures that the plans that are replanned when constraints come up or demand spikes, they can be executed. Planners can see the impact of them and then really pass them on with greater confidence what we're going to do. Ultimately, it's all about protecting customer commitments. You will have customers at various, whether it's your ABC segmentation, however you segment your customers, you will ensure that they are protected accordingly, even going to do things like fair share distribution, that everybody gets a piece of the constrained pie, thereby driving business performance. This is done by supporting order promising, allocation decision, bottleneck analysis, really understand what is causing a constraint. Is it supply? Is it supply of raw materials? Is it supply of an intermediate product? Is it production capacity, distribution capacity? And then work with suppliers on coming up with solutions. So really driving service level, reduce disruption, sorry, and use scarce resources where they create the most value. Doing all this with technology support rather than the planners having to do a lot of data chasing, data cleansing, data analysis, and only then start coming up with deviations. You could say, in a way, it takes the robot out of the human, allowing the human to focus on value adding tasks.
Got it. So the tooling changed, but the behaviors change as well. Vinod, post go live, what shifted in the day-to-day life of those planners, and how did that leadership conversations evolve once the scenarios become easier to run, compare, and trust? Uh, what did that leadership start doing differently once that conversations became easier?
Right. I will continue, where Claus left off. I think that's a pretty good segue to the question that you're asking. For planners, the biggest shift was moving from a reactive firefighting to a more scenario-based decision making. right? Before IBP, a lot of energy went into reconciling data across systems and manually stitching together a picture of what the supply and demand looked like. After go live, planners add a single view of demand, supply, inventory in one platform. That freed up the time to actually plan rather than compile, right? They could run what if scenarios. What happens if this supplier is late? What if the demand spikes in a specific region? What's the inventory impact of a let's say product transition? That was a genuine capability shift for us. For leadership, the change was in quality of the SNOP conversations they had. Instead of debating whose spreadsheet was right, executives could look at scenarios, comparison side by side with financial impact, right? Which was quantified. That made decisioning for the executives faster and more confident. It moved SNOP from a reporting exercise to a very true decision forum for us. So that was a huge shift that we saw post go live.
Thanks, Vinod. Thanks. I think I'll take a small detour here. SAP is having a big event, SAP Sapphire, that's coming up in Orlando on May 11th, 12th, and 13th of next month. Um, you will get a very good understanding of the AI enabled supply chain planning story at Illumina. It's one of the success stories that will be presented as part of Sapphire event, and we encourage all our audience to go ahead and then attend. There will be a recording that will be made available to you as well. That's first part. Then Bristlecone is also participating, and we have our own booth in Sapphire, booth number 356. There's a link that will be shared in this webinar as well. You can use those two links to see what SAP is presenting and what are the different sessions. There are hundreds of sessions, literally, that you can go through, as well as come to our booth and participate in some fun events and hear some of our other customers speak as well. Uh, with that, let me come back to this webinar. Planning is now smarter, faster, and more trusted. But as we all know, the supply chain doesn't end at a beautifully aligned plan. Now, let's talk about what changed once those decisions had to actually start shipping. Now, let's connect it to the logistics execution part, where this is where the cold chain and global distribution make visibility and collaboration as something non negotiable. So, back to Illumina. Planning got connected. Now let's talk about part of the supply chain that refuses to behave politely, right? Before transport management and business network came into the picture, um, where did that logistics hurt the most in your day-to-day operations? Was it the manual work, the carrier coordination, exception handling, or simply not having any visibility when it mattered?
Um, Honestly, I would say it was probably a combination of all the things that you just listed, right? But if I had to rank them, I would say visibility and manual processes were the biggest pain points for us. We are shipping, globally. We ship instruments, consumables, and reagents across multiple temperature conditions, multiple carriers, multiple modes. Before the TM enablement, a lot of that coordination was very manual. Emails, spreadsheets, phone calls to carriers, so on and so forth. um, Exception handling was very reactive. You'd find out about a delay after it had already impacted a customer commitment. Career collaboration was very fragmented, different processes for different regions. There was no standardized tendering or or tracking for that matter. And visibility was essentially very retrospective for us. We could tell we could tell you what happened, but not what was about to happen. So for life sciences companies where shipment integrity directly affects product quality and regulatory compliance, that level of manual effort and very limited visibility was unsustainable as we scale globally. So in essence, I would say that was the old crux of it.
Got it. Thanks, Vinod. So if IBP is the brain, then transportation is where the plan has to grow legs and actually start moving, right? So, Klaus, at the product level, how do you describe SAP transportation management in a connected supply chain? And what are those hidden transportation problems customers tend to underestimate until they are knee deep in surcharges, disruptions, and then the cross border complexity?
Yeah, so as we say, the IBP is the planning brain where the whole strategy comes together, gets divided into who does what, and then transportation management is really our strategic transportation, I must underline transportation planning and execution platform. It is where freight settlement sits at the heart of this connected logistics layer. So really um, ensuring that we are aligned with what are the orders we need to fulfill, what are the warehouse operations that are running, and doing a multi-enterprise collaboration, i.e. working with our carriers, working with customers, working with suppliers. So it does convert orders and inventory into executable, cost optimized, trackable um, transportation packages or loads that spans all modes and geographies. Ensuring finance, compliance, and partners are aligned allows you to really clearly see which shipment is going on which vehicle, with mode of transportation to reach its destination. What's the financial impact of a given load if I have loads from multiple customers in one trailer or in one container? Getting that visibility is super critical to ensure we also understand our pricing strategies. To your point, what are some of the key problems solved? Well, you touched upon them. What we typically see, it's the charging surcharges and settlement complexity. How do I handle if I've sent a truck that misses its border crossing? What does that lead of surcharges? How do we settle this based on fuel adjustment factors? Or if you think about shipping, bunker adjustment factors, currency adjustment factors, all of this is a potential quagmire if not enough efforts put into it. Minute spoke about point number two that I wanted to point out. It's the exception driven execution. How do we become proactive at replanning? How do I know what is the impact of a late delivery? Hopefully, before I'm at my gates and the truck is not there, I'm at my uh, rail yard and the shipment is not there, I will know this in advance. I can figure out what are my alternatives. And finally, multimodal cross-border compliance nuances. It's I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you before, Guru. I started out my professional career working for a logistics company. We were doing cross-modal, and the amount of paperwork and alignment there was between the various modes of transportations, customs, getting the right bill of lading, and have all this ready and aligned at the same point in time. That is something that are some of the key problems we see companies struggle with, potentially do not put too much effort into. To Nikhil's point before, do we put enough effort into the data before getting started? Do we put enough effort into preparing for this? These are the things that often come shortly after or within a project around transportation management.
Got it. So the transportation management actually runs the show internally, but the real world involves other people, carriers, partners, and then the reality. So where does the business network for logistics fit alongside the transportation management? In practical terms, class, how does it change collaboration end to end from tendering to tracking to settlement, especially when you are working with a broad carrier ecosystem? So back to you,
So
Klaus.
yeah, so specifically in this case, business network for logistics, or also BN for L. The marketing term is it's a multi-enterprise logistical collaboration layer. Let's try and turn that into more clear speak. What that means is, think of it as the business Facebook for transportation purposes. I onboard, you onboard, everybody onboards. I don't have to keep connections with all players. We are all here and we can collaborate seamlessly. Whether it's me looking for a carrier, I have a load, I can tender that, run a quick tender process, select the best carrier. I can track where a shipment is real time, which is super critical again to Vinod's point. I'm not surprised when the shipment is not at the point it's supposed to be at the time it's supposed to be. I know that well in advance. And if it's a multimodal, it would then say instead of going sea cargo, I'm gonna airlift it. I'm proactively in charge of this. We share a lot of documentations across it, so it's not just sort of connecting two people, it's also sharing the relevant documentation, bill of ladings, customs documents, and we can do time slotting. So if you imagine, say, trucks coming and going, you have a traffic control. We cover all this with the business network logistics. It's really about getting partners up to speed fast. We talk to companies that have hundreds, if not more, of transportation partners. If you have to onboard them yourself, gotta keep connections with them going. We take over that work. We ensure you're tracking where is your order and really ensuring there is a ecosystem built up around tracking your logistics. So feeding that outside world input into my transportation management, into my planning, to make it even more intelligent and more aware of what's going on in the real world.
Got it. So, the lot of programs, they don't fail because systems can't do it. They fail because people go back to emails and spreadsheets out of that muscle memory. Nikhil, when you implement that transportation management together with business network, what are those true make or break moments that determine adoption and outcomes? Is it the carrier onboarding or milestone event design or exception workflows or something teams usually overlook?
So yeah, so that's a great question, Guru. It's again to kind of give you a simple answer. It's all of the above, right? So as you also pointed out, most TM programs don't fail on core functionality, right? They fail on adoption and decision flow. So I think if you look at it from our experience, there are these three make or break moments, right? First, I would say is carrier onboarding and collaboration, right? So if that whole onboarding is complex or inconsistent, then the planners and the logistics teams immediately fall back to, you mentioned this before, say their spreadsheets or emails or their old ways of working, right? So we've learned to standardize onboarding early, say defining which carriers use portal access, which use, say, APIs or EDI, and making sure the tendering, confirmations, and updates are frictionless right from day one, right? Second is milestone design. So it's not enough to know that your shipment has, either shipped or arrived. The real value would come from defining business relevant milestones, right? So something like pickup confirmed, temperature breach risk, right? Could be, say, customs delay, missed handoff, right? So tying all those milestones to eventually ownership and then action. And the third, and if you ask me, the most critical is exception handling, right? So if every delay is creating an alert or giving you an exception, there are going to be too many alerts for the planners to act on, right? Or for the users to act on. So what happens is the users tend to ignore these alerts. Similarly, if the alerts are too late, then teams can't respond on time, right? So we focus very, very heavily on rule based exceptions, right? Say predictive ETAs, and then have a clear escalation path. So the system tells you what matters, why it matters, and then who needs to act on it, right? So when kind of all these three elements come together, that's where TM and business network, they really become your operational decision platforms and not just systems of record, right? So I think these are a few important aspects that need to be looked at.
Thanks, Nikhil. So now we are in life sciences logistics, where the shipments they don't need to just arrive; it needs to arrive right in a right condition. So Vinod, from a temperature controlled shipping perspective, it adds a whole extra dimension. What did you learn about designing those processes that handle multiple temperature conditions and still stay scalable in terms of globally?
Right. So actually, this is a critical one for life sciences, as you all know. At Illumina, we ship across multiple temperature profiles. We have ambient, we have 2 to 8 degree Celsius, we have frozen, and the requirements actually vary by product as well, and by destination, by regulatory jurisdiction. Um, what we learned is that you cannot board cold chain logic as an afterthought. It had to be embedded in the process design from start in how you define your shipping conditions, how you select your carriers qualified for a specific temperature range, how you set up monitoring and execution and exception rules. The scalability challenge is very real. How you set up monitoring, what works for North America doesn't automatically work for, let's say, Asia or Europe, because of different career landscapes that we have in those specific regions, the lane structures, the regulatory requirements. So we focused on building a global process template with configurable regional parameters, standardize the whole framework, but allow for regional flexibility where it's genuinely required and needed. The other lesson, I would say, is that the temperature compliance is a cross-functional concern. It's not just about logistics, right? Um, Quality, you have your regulatory, you have your planning, and logistics all need to be aligned on the rules of the engagement. And the system needs to enforce them consistently rather than relying on tribal knowledge. And this is how we were able to handle the complexity.
Thanks, Vinod. So, the because visibility alone is just a watching that problem happen in a high definition mode. But Nikhil, how do you turn that visibility into an action? It's not just tracking the shipments, but real decisioning. What does it take to move from where is it to what should we do now, using those alerts, predicted ETA, and proactive customer communication?
Sure. So I think, as you've mentioned it before, Guru, right? So we strongly believe that visibility by itself has very, very limited value, right? The real value comes from what happens after you've seen the problem, right? So we approach this typically in three layers. The first, I would say, is contextual visibility. So instead of showing every event, we enrich shipment data with planning priorities, service levels, and the downstream impact, right? So that way teams immediately know which shipment matters more. Second, I would say, is predictive insight, right? So using, say, predictive ETAs, historical patterns, we don't wait for the delay to occur, right? So we surface risk before it even becomes an issue, and that's what gives planners and logistics teams the time that they need to respond to it, right? And third is the action orchestration, right? So every alert is tied to a recommended action, right? Whether you should say reroute, reprioritize, right, notify customers, or perhaps adjust downstream planning assumptions, right? So in many cases, those actions can be triggered either directly through TM, or then it can be reflected back into planning, right? So I would say the moment visibility feeds planning, execution, and communication simultaneously altogether, that's when it starts becoming a decision engine, right? And not just a static kind of a dashboard. And this is where customers, I think, would see the real ROI or the return on investment, right? So that I think those aspects are important.
Thanks, Nikhil. So now we have got that planning and logistics, both of them are talking to each other without needing any translator or hundreds of different spreadsheets. But the next big question is, how do you move from some of the legacy systems like APO to IBP in a way that modernizes the backbone without actually interrupting the day-to-day operations? So, Klaus, when people hear APO to IBP migration, uh, what's the biggest misconception that you run into? Do they treat it like a technical shift, lift and shift, or when it's really a process redesign too? And from SAP's point of view, what is the recommended approach, especially for those customers who are still on ECC and not yet on S4?
So the biggest misconception I see is it's purely a technical move. As you say, it's a lift and shift. This is how we work for the last 10, 15 years. Let's absolutely not things can be the same. An opportunity for any organization to take a good look at the way it's operating today, realigning that to the current and future business environment, and then defining the new operating model, roles and responsibilities. It's a chance to adopt new technologies. There's so much going on with artificial intelligence, machine learning, visualization of data, big data sources. How do we find heads and tail? And that really, to the point from early on, how to take the robot out of the person and make them focus on more value adding tasks, more proactive work. Important point is it's about learning from the latest experience from thought leaders like Bristlecone. Leverage that latest technology to really shift the focus from firefighting to delivering business resilience, agility, and continuity. Um, where do you start? What's our recommendation if you're not on S4? You're gonna hate this answer. It's a typical sort of consulting answer. It depends, but I really like Vinod's points. Like, let's start where the pain is the biggest. If it's broken, let's start fixing that. If it's stable, let's not do that immediately. Let's do that later on. Understand what is it you want to achieve. What's holding you back from achieving that, and then defining your path forward, your roadmap based on that analysis. That will give you the the fastest return on investment, give you the fastest business impact, and will stand you in good stead in defining where do we start, what comes next, and how to move forward on this.
Got it. Thanks. So, Nikhil, quickly, if you can often frame that adoption paths as coexist, replace, or wait and evaluate. So, what are the practical criteria you use to choose that right path? Is it the process maturity, data readiness, or the architecture, business urgency? And how do you de risk that journey so customers don't end up running three systems and multiple spreadsheets?
Sure. So at the outset, we at Bristlecone, we do an assessment of the current state, right? So be it with regards to process maturity, it could be data, or even the technical or the technology architecture, right? And then depending on the objectives and the business requirements of our customers, right? So you heard from Vinod in terms of what Illumina's requirements or perspective was, right? So depending on that, we then recommend one of these three approaches, right? Which is either replace, or coexist, or then wait and evaluate. So, let me give you a few examples there. So in case of a few of our customers, and Illumina is one of them, right? So the ERP system is ECC, right? And in Illumina's case, the planning system was a combination of Kinaxis for demand planning and APO for supply planning, which was APO SNP, and also for order promising, which was APO GATP, right? From a business perspective, Illumina, as again Vinod mentioned, was very clear that they were facing issues more on the demand planning side, right? So things like forecast accuracy, ability to kind of generate that consensus demand plan, and also essentially to get that entire forecasting in place. So the first thing we did was we replaced Kinaxis with IBP for demand and also enabled SNOP for consensus process, right? So once that was done, you had an architecture where you had IBP demand and SNOP, and that kind of coexisted with APO, SNP, and GATP, right? So that was the architecture at that time. Then in a subsequent phase, we moved APO SNP, or the supply planning piece of it, right? So again, it's not like just a technical migration. It was more on the process plus technology implementation. So we moved the supply planning processes from APO SNP to IBP response and supply, right? So now we had IBP having demand, SNOP, and response and supply, and kind of coexisting with APO GATP, right? And more recently, Illumina has embarked on the S4 journey, right? So once that is in place, then APO GATP will be replaced by AATP within S4, right? So that's been kind of the journey, or the timeline as far as Illumina is concerned. So I can give you one more example, right? For another of our customer, uh, they had APO, DP, and SNP in place, right? DP was fairly standard, but they had made a lot of customizations on the SNP side, right? So primarily to address certain challenges around MTO scenario and the truckload build, right? So these were two things where they had some customizations. And when we, again, this was about 2 years back, when we looked at IBP, there weren't standard functionalities that were kind of handling some of those requirements. So what we did was we had discussions with SAP, with Clause, with the product owners of IBP as well from SAP. And the inputs we got was there were sort of functionalities in the roadmap from an SAP standpoint, couple of releases down the line, couple of quarters down the line, right? So in that case, we advise our customer to kind of wait and evaluate, so to say, rather than rush into it with customizations and make a mess of it, right? So in those cases, it was kind of advisable to sort of look at standard and see if that meets your requirement rather than rush into certain things and complicate it, right? So again, to summarize, what we do is look at the current state, look at the current pain areas, also the business objectives, and then kind of accordingly give the appropriate recommendations from our perspective.
Got it. Thanks. So Vinod, in real world migration, it's almost never all at once, and it should be, of course. Without getting anything sensitive, what were the safest ways you found to face modernization while keeping the business running? And what guiding principle helped you to decide what to move now versus what to keep stable for a while? Now, there's also an audience question which is more appropriate if we can take it up along with this, which is to share certain KPIs that you choose to pursue with from a demand inventory and response point of view. And
Sure.
what were the Illumina's priorities and what is the demand planning ethos?
Absolutely. And I think the honest answer here is you face by risk. I think we all covered partially how we did that. So you face it by risk, not by convenience, right? At Illumina, we had a very clear 5-year roadmap. Supply chain planning transformation first, then logistics and transportation, then ERP migration to S4 HANA, which currently is what we are doing. Within the planning itself, as I broke out earlier, we phased further into demand planning, SNOP first, then inventory optimization, then supply planning migration. The principle was always don't disrupt what's stable until you're ready. And always design interim integration processes so the business doesn't feel a gap. For example, when we moved demand planning to IBP, as I said, APO-SNP continued running supply planning. So we did not, let the disruption happen. We did build the integration bridge between them. That coexistence model is very critical. The other thing I'd emphasize is invest, and Nikhil, you touched upon that. Uh, Invest in data readiness before you start. I think that's I've seen my peers in other industries, um, you know, having tough time because they did not really think about the data readiness. And we assessed data quality upfront and add a dedicated team from day one. That saved us enormous time later because we weren't, debugging data issues during the actual testing cycles. We were actually testing the core functionalities during the SITs, UATs, regressions, all of those cycles. And finally, I would say change management. That cannot be an afterthought. We had dedicated tracks for data, for OCM, and for process. That structure was in place before we even wrote a first line or even started the configuration on the system. And that is what I think was the success for us to be have a good implementation and the usage afterwards.
Thanks, Vinod. I think we just have a couple of more questions. Maybe we can take it up before we wind up. The next one is to Bristlecone and SAP, the context of exception handling and alerts in a connected supply chain. How do you avoid alert fatigue while still reacting early enough to that matter? So,
So maybe I can take that up, and Klaus, you can add on to that, right? So that's a very pertinent question because what we've seen is if you have too many alerts kind of getting triggered in the system, it's all useless, right? You don't know which ones to really go after, and it's just not practical to resolve all of them, right? So the key is to identify which are those alerts on which you are able to take action on, right? And I know it's easier said than done, but this is really really important from a sort of perspective of getting the exception management right, right? So idea is to identify those set of alerts on which the planners can take action, right? That is your first priority. The next is, I mean, the nice to haves are, if there are alerts or information that you are getting as a planner, that's good to know, that's fine, right? But if it's something that you can't act on, then you might as well not get it, right? So it's a tough kind of call that you have to take, but these are discussions that you need to have with the business, uh, saying that what is it that you really look at from a, a, a exception management and the ability to take action on those, right? So again, no easy answer to this, but these are conversations that you need to have with business. Identify those set of alerts that are important from a business standpoint and only configure those, right? Rather than get thousands of alerts every day. Claus, anything else you want to add?
You touched upon it earlier, Nikhil, the whole thing about having clarity and what do I do about these alerts. Now I'm being alerted, and here are the options I have at my disposal. I don't have to come out and reinvent the wheel or figure out. Klaus doesn't have to understand what Nikhil, Guri, and Vinod have done in similar situations. The system proposes that, and that is sort of a first step to also build trust in the system, surfacing the right alerts, proposing the right mitigating steps that can lead into automation of some of these alert alert management and alert resolution.
got it. I think we are almost reaching the end of the segment. If there is one piece of advice you would give to a company that's starting now, one thing to do and one thing to avoid, and your closing comments, starting with Vinod, and then Klaus, and then Nikhil.
One thing to do, definitely, define a comprehensive roadmap with a very clear end state vision, but deliver in phases that produce measurable value at each stage. Don't wait 3 years for your first win. Sequence it out. Sequence it so the leadership sees the results early and they stay invested. That's really, really important. One thing to avoid, I would say, don't treat this as a tool implementation. If you focus, purely on technology without giving equal attention to process, redesign, data quality, and change management, you'll you'll end up with a shiny new system um, running, but with broken processes. So I would say that probably is a thing to avoid.
Class.
Yeah, say what to really do, stay curious. Stay curious about what technology can do today, what it can do tomorrow. Continue that curiosity because technology is evolving at such a fast pace. So that curiosity helps you to continuously evolve your operating model. Um, I'll echo what Vinod just said. Don't underestimate the importance of change management. Start early, rooted in why you're changing, the positives it'll bring for the organization, teams, and individuals, and ensure sustainment efforts well beyond system go live. It's just so easy for people to fall back into the old ways of working. So those were my
Thank,
views.
thanks, Klaus. And Nikhil, any last closing
Yeah,
comments?
sure. So I think one thing that we should do is ensure that we have a very early business involvement in this kind of an engagement, right? In this type of a transformation journey. So it's important to get your business users early. Bristlecone recommends a prototype-driven delivery approach where the design and build phases are iterative and more of agile, right? So that's where business can come in, business users can come in, have a look, get an early peek into the solution and also give feedback, right? So there is some time for course correction rather than they coming in during UAT and then things not going as per plan, right? So it's important to get that business involvement very, very early into any engagement of this size. And I think I completely agree with what Klaus and Vinod said. What you need to avoid is just treat it as an IT project or a tool implementation of sorts, right? Without giving focus on data, process, and change management. I think these three pillars of process, data, OCM have to be part of any planning engagement along with the tool implementation.
Thanks, Nikhil. So we have covered a full journey today from why connected planning matters to how it transforms execution, and finally, how to modernize responsibly without disrupting the business. Huge thanks to Vinod for grounding this in real customer decisions, and to Klaus for the product and roadmap clarity, and for Nikhil for translating all of this into something teams can actually implement and adopt. If there is one takeaway, it's this: modern supply chains, they don't win on better forecasts alone. They win on faster, better connected decisions from plan to ship. Thank you all for joining, and we hope today's discussion helps you move from intention to an execution. And thanks to everyone who joined. We'll share the recording and follow up assets with all the resistance. Um, you guys have a good day or good night wherever you are. And thanks, and we will see you in another webinar pretty soon.